So I ended my last lecture just basically introducing the discussion of Ottoman Empire. And by the way, you'll notice on this plaque it says 1299 to 1923. So it's a direct basically result of events happening after World War One that's going to lead to the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And so this is a long-lasting uh, regime, an empire that when I compared it to the Soviet legacy, one thing is it far outlasted the Soviets. That's one comparison to just take note of on that aspect. So anyhow, okay, so the battle for empire. So the Ottomans were able to take advantage of Byzantine weakness. In other words, the Eastern Roman empires. The way they were. And there was a network of vassal principalities in the Balkans. Serbs and Bosnians revolted and were defeated by Sultan Murad in the 14th century at the Battle of Kosovo. And yet, in that battle, a Serb slayed Murad. But ultimately, they were able to get a territorial base in Europe. Okay, and as I was talking about the Balkans, and this has left a major impression, by the way, of course, not just on Europeans but on the Balkans itself. And I put up this clip of a movie about Kosovo and this time period, and so again, many of you may not remember now if you're younger, but there was, the ethnic cleansings and the killings against Muslims and the fighting between Christians in the Balkans after the dissolving of Yugoslavia was terrible and rooted in memories of this past, of these kind of this idea that Muslims are all foreigners, even though it's been quite a long time, and that invaders and so you have Serbian Orthodox, you have I think Croatians are Catholic, and then you have the Bosnian Muslims and so on. So it gets complicated, but this did become integrated into the Ottoman Empire, and there was a certain amount of peace and stability in the middle of that. Okay. The Ottoman Empire. So Mehmed II took the throne in 15th century, and Constantinople in the 15th century, also 1453, changing its name to Istanbul. So Constantinople, named after Constantine, ends up becoming Istanbul. So there was a There Might Be Giants song. It used to be Istanbul was Constantinople, and actually I think they sang that was an older version of a song. Anyways, forgive me. The bottom line is, just remember, Constantinople becomes Istanbul, or Istanbul was Constantinople. Okay, all right. Um, Greco-Roman Byzantium becomes Islamic and Turkish, and Turks basically inherited the Roman, the last vestiges of the Eastern Roman world. Okay, and like all historical things, when you go and conquer some people or places, you often absorb many of the cultural traits coming from that legacy as well. Okay, the portrait, as mentioned here, of Mehmed is much more Byzantine than it is Islamic. All right. Okay. Um, and what they did is that and this wasn't just a uniquely Islamic thing. I think if you've remembered, as we went through many of these classes, when you've had religions fight and conquer, there's been different regimes that do different things. We've seen some empires incorporate local religions. We've seen some destroy local religions, and we've seen others incorporate, and we've seen others actually convert to the people's religions that they conquer. Islam and Christianity, as a general rule, tended to take over buildings. So in Spain, when the Christians came back over, they turned mosques into churches. Muslims come and turn churches into mosques. Okay, and that is just been the habit for these time period. So the Hagia Sophia, that's a Greek word, right? Hagia Sophia, the holy wisdom. Okay, and this beautiful church was then turned into this beautiful mosque. And now what's happened is it's opened as a museum, okay, in 1935 that shows its layers. And so this is one of those kind of wonders of Turkey where you have the Christian mosaic with the Greek written here, okay? And then you have the Arabic and the Islamic inscriptions. And so this beautiful building is now kind of shown as the legacy of these layers that it experienced over history. Okay, so it's a very interesting aspect of modern Turkey, showing kind of what happened through this time period. Okay, moving on. I want to talk about Ottoman government, and I want to talk about it because I also want you to think about Islamic law gets talked a lot about, Sharia law, whatever that is, and would-be caliphs that want to, rule the Islamic world. And with the Ottoman Empire, they really left good records. They were good record keepers, and we have a very strong idea of how they set up their government. And it's very interesting, I think, and revealing about the way that Islam was actually practiced in terms of a legal setting. Okay, and so we often hear about the separation of church and state being some sort of Western thing and not part of the Islamic. But I think that if you look at the medieval Western and Eastern church mixed with governments, and you look at the Ottoman Empire, they seem to me to be just as balanced in terms of the way that they had the secular and the religious come together. Okay, so we had on top Kanun law, which was the Sultan's law. Ideally, it shouldn't contradict Islam, but it wasn't necessarily an Islamic law. Okay, right? I'm assuming if he said everybody should wear purple, that could be Kanun law. It wouldn't necessarily oppose anything. He can make a sultan has a right to make laws, and these are the laws of the land. In that sense, it's secular, right? Because he's using his power to make law. Then you had Sharia law or Islamic law and Islamic courts, and you'd have a judge that would use the Quran, the Hadiths, which are the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, and scholars who had these several schools of thought on what to do with law. I mean, and just to make it clear, the Quran actually doesn't have a lot of laws in it. Much of the Hadiths have more explicit statements. But then you have vague things. I mean, just give me an example. What would Islamic law now say about the internet? Well, nothing, right? So if you live in an Islamic country, the scholars have to look at and infer from ancient law what the context of something like that would apply to these texts. So back then they had many things coming that weren't addressed within the Hadiths or the Quran, and so lawyers would then have to make decisions, regarding those things. Okay, and then here's what's interesting: you had Jewish and Christian courts of what are called the dhimmi peoples, the protected peoples, which are in a lower position. They are paying a tax for not being Muslim. This is true. But they're also allowed to do their own things. They have a lot of autonomy. So, for example, Jews and Christians can drink alcohol and, in fact, use alcohol in some of their religious rituals. Muslims were forbidden to. Christians and Jews were allowed to have taverns. They were allowed to use alcohol for communion in churches or for some of the holidays for Jewish holidays. Jews and Muslims didn't eat pork, but Christians did. So pigs could be allowed for the Christian world, not for Jews and Muslims. And divorces and many of the problems that would happen on the civil level could be handled with Jews and Christians themselves. Okay. So actually, I'm going to return and talk a little bit more about this as I go into the next lecture. I'll end here.